just like metal fountain pens aren't mere quill mimicry, right? They are better than quills. I believe that divorcing meat production from animal slaughter not only can help slash our footprint on the planet, but it can create all types of novel culinary experiences that we have never before enjoyed. Think about, for example, cheese. Now, most people today consider cheese part of their daily diet in countries like the United States, but cheese is actually a pretty novel food. For the vast majority of human history, we didn't have cheese because it takes a lot to make cheese, right? First, you have to domesticate cows, then you got to start drinking their milk, then you got to figure out how to curdle milk, which requires rennet, which for a long time was only possible with calf intestines. So, you think about the time, let's say after cows had been domesticated, but before anybody figured out how to make cheese, which is a period of a very long time. In that period, nobody had ever fantasized about brie, Gouda, cheddar, Swiss cheese, and so on, right? Like nobody had thought of them because nobody had ever experienced those foods. They are relatively novel foods on the history of humanity's timeline. But now many people consider them to be a staple of their diet and they don't want to live without them. Well, what new foods may we soon consider staples of our new diet when we start having new ways to make meat that are divorced from the need to raise and slaughter animals? What if, for example, just like you can currently go out and buy a bread maker or an ice cream maker for your kitchen counter, what if you could buy a meat maker? You just drop in a tea bag full of fungi spores and come back a few hours later to find freshly made meat. Or, what if, just like your local pub may brew their own IPA in the back, they could be brewing their own local artisanal fungi-based meat right on site for your dinner that evening. Even more, what if humanity does ever learn how to depart from our pale blue dot and explore the cosmos? You can rest assured that if we ever are engaged in cosmic tourism, we are not going to be carrying Noah's Ark in tow. If those cosmic tourists want to eat meat, they're going to need to grow it themselves. What better way than to bring microscopic spores of fungi and grow them with them, either on their space shuttles or on their new habitats on Mars or wherever they are going? I really think that this type of new technology may not only enable new novel culinary experiences like what I was just describing, but it may also shift a paradigm in our thinking about our relationship with our fellow creatures on this planet. Because for a very long time, our relationship with our fellow animals has been one that's based really, if we are honest with ourselves, on violence and domination. However, maybe it will become one that is based more on compassion and respect. We already know that folks like Copernicus and Galileo helped us to comprehend that we are not the centers of the physical universe. Well, maybe when we aren't so reliant on the exploitation of animals for food, we might come to think of ourselves as perhaps not the center of the moral universe either. That maybe the animals with whom we share this planet exist on this planet not merely for us, but they exist here with us. And that maybe we ought to view them as individuals who are deserving of compassion and respect, just like we think of ourselves. Now, that isn't to say that they are necessarily our moral equals, but it is to say that maybe we won't have a relationship that's just based on subjugating those creatures, and that we could create a new type of society that would be unthinkable to subject non-humans to the type of torment that we currently subject the animals who we raise for food. Now, it may seem unbelievable that that type of a world could exist after literally hundreds of thousands of years of human history of eating other animals. But, there's lots of things that seemed impossible that now seem common sense to us. Imagine, for example, just the fact that, let's say 150 years ago in the United States, the debate that was being had in our society was about whether humans ought to be able to own each other, right? For most of human history, it was considered normal and natural for humans to hold other humans in bondage. The Egyptians, the Romans, the Greeks, they all had slaves. Even Socrates and Plato, who were, the modern foundational thinkers of Western civilization, never thought in all of their philosophizing to criticize slavery. In the Bible, groups are enslaving each other all the time. And yet, 150 years ago, that was the legitimate social debate as to whether one person should be able to own another person. Thankfully, today, we know that that type of relationship is an abomination. We view it as ethically repugnant. Gratefully, we do. But 150 years ago, which was a blink of an eye, historically speaking, is a very different perception. You could hold a legitimate, respectable position in society as a member of Congress, a doctor, a lawyer, and so on, and hold either side of that debate, being pro or anti-slavery. 100 years ago, the legitimate debate in our society was whether more than half of the Americans ought to be able even to vote. We had a debate whether women should be able to vote. And it wasn't as easy as you think. There were a lot of women who were totally opposed to women's suffrage and thought that wasn't the appropriate place for women to be in the public sphere. Yet, of course, today, we think of any country that doesn't allow women to vote as being backward and archaic. And yet, 100 years ago, that was the United States legitimately having that debate. Just half a century ago, we were debating whether blacks and whites ought to be able to share the same water fountain. And yet today, of course, we would view anybody who believed in racial segregation as, really somebody you really wouldn't want to even be friends with. And yet there were many members of Congress and, again, respectable professions where people sat on both sides of the segregation debate. Now, of course, today, if anybody took the position that they supported slavery, or they thought women shouldn't be able to vote, or they thought the races ought to be physically segregated from one another, they would face social ruin for expressing a position that a blink of an eye ago, historically speaking, was a totally legitimate, respectable position to hold in our society. I'm very grateful that they no longer are respectable positions, but just imagine if one of your friends, not as a joke, not ironically, but seriously posted on social media that they supported any one of those, human bondage, the denial of suffrage to women, or so on. I mean, at best, they would lose their friends. They might lose their jobs. They would be a social pariah to hold any of those views. So it's so easy for us to think about how, of course, our ancestors were wrong about slavery. Of course, they were wrong about suffrage. Of course, they were wrong about segregation. But it's a lot harder for us to think about what we are wrong about and what our descendants may feel like, of course, we were wrong about. I believe that while there are many things that we probably are wrong about today that our descendants will condemn us for, the treatment of animals in factory farms is one of them. The idea that we should be able to lock up animals in cages so small that they can barely move an inch their entire lives, pump them full of antibiotics, make them live beak to beak by the tens of thousands inside windowless warehouses, and subject them to slaughter methods that most people don't even want to hear about, that is going to be viewed with more than a skeptical eye in the future. And I think that the technologies like microbial fungi fermentation are going to bring us to a place where it's easier for us to accept that that type of a treatment of non-humans is an abomination. Technology has changed so much about how we live here on Earth. Instead of whipping horses, we now use bikes and cars to get around. Nobody stopped whipping horses because they cared about horses. They stopped because superior methods of transportation were invented that allowed us to more efficiently get around. Instead of harpooning whales for their oil, we now use electricity. Nobody stopped harpooning whales because they cared about whales. They stopped because kerosene was invented, which was a cleaner, more efficient way to light our homes. And eventually we moved on to electricity, which was even better than kerosene. And whales were liberated from harpoons because of that new technology. And again, instead of ripping feathers out of geese's bodies, we now tap on screens. Nobody stopped harming geese because they cared about the geese. They stopped because fountain pens were invented. While these new technologies may at first seem odd to us, recall, for example, that what we now know as cars were originally called horseless carriages. We eventually come to realize just how superior the new technologies are. And we switch to them en masse, hardly recalling what life was once like before the new invention. Just imagine how shocked you would be today, for example, if someone you knew relied on horses for transportation, or they relied on whales for lighting, or geese for writing. Well, I believe that technologies like fungi fermentation will enable our descendants to also express shock if someone they know chooses to slaughter animals rather than use the obviously superior technology that humanity has invented. Fungi fermentation is just one way to help liberate humanity from our reliance on animal slaughter, but it is a critically important and, yes, scalable solution to this vexing issue of how we are going to sustainably feed ourselves into the 21st century. We only have one planet. We shouldn't deforest the rest of it just so we can eat more and more animals. Instead, just as we must end our dependence on fossil fuels, so too must we end our dependence on factory farms. Today, the only place you are likely to encounter a goose quill pen is inside of a museum. Similarly, it's time for us to leave the factory farming of animals where it too belongs, which is in our past. That is what we are working on at the Better Meat Co., again, the company that I run, to try to create that type of new, humane, sustainable, efficient food production system that is less reliant on animals, that harnesses the power of the fungi kingdom and enables us to enjoy the foods that humanity loves, but with a much lighter footprint on the planet. So I want to say thank you to everybody who's joined this session. I see there are a number of comments in the chat, and so I'm going to take a look at those, but let me see if there's anything. Thank you, Dominique, so fascinating. I appreciate that. I'm going to start answering questions that are in here. So you can put any questions in the chat that you would like, and just chat away in there. So first,
hey, Paul.
Yes.
This Michael. So
Hey, Mike.
So thank you very much for that that great presentation. So actually, yeah, for the audience members, if you have any questions, if you're comfortable taking questions from the chat, you guys can put the question in the chat. If you'd like to raise your hand,
Sure.
you can do so in Zoom. We'll post how to raise your hand in Zoom in the chat as well. So great presentation, very interesting. So I've got some questions, and then we'll go to the audience and ask some questions. I'm going to ask you some questions about your presentation today with regard to the fermented fungi meat, as well as some of the clean meat stuff as well, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, sure. Sounds great.
Okay.
And it does look like there does look like there are a good number of comments in the chat already from people too. Are you going to be going through those or no?
Yeah, well, we can go through there and go down there as well.
Great.
Yeah, there was definitely
Thanks,
a lot of comments in there, and yeah, and this is this is actually a very new subject, different than other topics that we have. So first of all, one of the we're called the Real Truth About Health Conference. What is like the health profile for a product like this? Is this something I would assume that it's going to be healthier than animal products, given all that we've learned during this conference about the dangers of eating animal products. But from a health perspective, how does this product look?
Sure. So if you think about what people actually like about meat, which is protein, iron, zinc, and so on, the mycoprotein that we grow at the Better Meat Co. has all of that. In fact, it has more of it. If you think about the things that people don't like about meat, saturated fat, cholesterol, excess calories, so on, we don't have that. We don't have any of that. And so this is a product that gets you what you want from meat, but doesn't give you the things you don't want about meat. And one of the most important things to remember is that it's also packed with fiber. Meat has no fiber. There's not one piece of meat on the planet that has any fiber in it whatsoever. The reason is because animals don't have fiber in them. We have skeletons. Skeletons hold us up. Plants and fungi don't have skeletons. They have fiber. That's what holds them up. And while there's essentially no protein deficiency in America whatsoever, there is rampant fiber deficiency in America. More than 90% of Americans don't meet the meager fiber requirements of a daily allowance that the federal government sets. And other countries have even higher fiber requirements than what we have in the United States, but more than 90% of Americans don't even meet the US standard, which is a very low standard. The problem with fiber deficiency is not just things like constipation, which is a problem in and of itself, but colon cancer, heart disease, and other really horrible ailments that can be deadly that are associated with fiber deficiency. We need to eat more fiber. And if people aren't going to eat more fiber in the form, let's say, of bean and rice burritos and lentil soup, why not put it in the protein products that people were eating, in the meat products? And the benefit of using mycoprotein, like from the Better Meat Co., is that you get both. You get a bundle of high protein and high fiber all at one time. And the fiber is an intact whole fiber rich in beta glucans that are shown to be great for your microbiome. And so this is really almost like a superfood. Like if you were going to be going to Mars, this is what you'd want to have with you because it's got so much of what you need in it. So the nutrition on this is amazing. The taste is great. The texture is great. The environmental footprint is light. This is what we need to scale.
And does the fiber come from the mycelium itself, or is it something that's added to the product?
No. The mycelium is a single ingredient. It's not there's no there's not some fiber added to it. This is a whole food intact product. The mycelium is the product. And so in the same way that, you might think about a portobello mushroom, right? But imagine instead of eating the portobello mushroom, you're eating the mycelium, which is the root-like structure of fungi. That product is what we at the Better Meat Co. sell.
Okay, and then you mentioned that you work with other businesses to do they take this and then make this into a meat, or can people eat this product directly, throw it on the grill, and make a burger out of it without any further processing?
You might want to add fat to it because most people like a burger because it has some fat. This is very low in fat, so unless you want a really lean burger, that would be how you would do it. However, we are a B2B ingredients company. We sell to other food companies. We are not seeking to become like the next Beyond Meat or the next Impossible Foods. What we want to do is sell to all of those companies. So they can use our mycelium to make the next generation of alternative meats that will be whole food, all natural, and absolutely delicious. So we currently run a pilot factory here in Sacramento, California, where we can produce thousands of pounds. We cannot produce millions of pounds, which is what's needed to actually go nationwide. So we're not in, our mycelium is not sold in Walmart and Costco and so on yet. We're currently fundraising in order to build a much larger factory so that we can scale this company and get to a place where we can actually produce for all of those companies. So if there's somebody listening, you're interested in owning a piece of the Better Meat Co., love to talk to you about that, how we can work together to scale this mycelium fermentation platform to create a much cleaner, more humane, more sustainable meat industry.
And are there products on the market that are using the mycelium meat that you guys provide?
Yes, we do sell to restaurants and they make like mycelium-based steaks and so on. That's largely in Northern California right now, only because of the scale that we're at. Again, we can't produce millions of pounds, which is what would be needed to go and and sell in the Walmarts of the world. But we're eager to get to that point. And Laura Slit, hello, I see you asked what the stock symbol is. It's a private company. We're not a publicly traded company, so these are our private shares that are sold. So the company is backed by a variety of food companies, venture capitalists, hedge funds, and so on. But we do accept investment from individual investors as well. But just get in touch with me via our website, which is bettermeat.co. Again, that's bettermeat.co. You can just message us through there if you're interested in owning a piece of the company. We'd be grateful to talk with you about that.
And as far as the other companies producing this stuff, is there anything that we could order now if we wanted to try it out? I personally would love to try a product. I'm sure many of our participants would love to try this out.
I would love for you to. If you're in Northern California, Michael, let me know. We'll point you to the right restaurants, but where you can go get our steak. But we're in limited distribution right now only because of the scale of the company. So we are sadly not in a position to sell nationwide or internationally at this point with the mycelium, but we're working on it. So if you're in Northern California and you want to try the product, just get in touch again via bettermeat.co and we'll point you to the right places.
And are you planning on doing any sort of research on the health outcomes of people who move from meat to eating this product? Are you guys looking into that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've done safety-based research to show that the product is perfectly safe to consume, which it absolutely is. But the next step for us is to look at what happens to people who actually do regularly consume this mycelium, because again, it's packed with beta glucans, protein, fiber, iron, zinc. It would be great for your microbiome. So it should be a real winner in that. But we haven't done those tests yet, but we would like to. Dominique in the chat asked, where can you see pictures of the products? You can see them at bettermeat.co. Again, bettermeat.co, or you can follow us on Instagram at bettermeatco, where you can see every day we're posting cool videos of the product. Beth, you mentioned Quorn in the UK does something like this, and yeah, that's absolutely correct. Quorn is a cool company. For decades, they've been making mycoprotein via fermentation. They own about 99% of the mycoprotein world in terms of market share right now. But what we do is different from them. So first of all, their product is, generally mixed with egg whites, and it has to have other processes like freezing and so on done to it to make it more meat-like as well. I don't find it to be identical to meat. I find it to be something that you may enjoy the taste of it. In fact, I like their vegan products. So most of their products are not vegan, some of them are, but I like the vegan ones. And I don't like them though because they taste like meat. I like them because I like the taste of them. It's kind of like if you like tofu. If you like tofu, you eat tofu not because you can't tell that it's different from meat. You like tofu because you like tofu and you want to eat it. The same is so with Quorn, Quorn, which is, um, you know, it doesn't really taste like meat to me, at least. So if you don't like it, as Beth is indicating that she doesn't, um, it's not because of mycoprotein. It's just because those particular products are that way. The other thing to remember is that mycoprotein is not mycoprotein, right? So there's lots of different species that you can grow of fungi proteins. And so in the same way that, let's say, think about all the species of animals who people eat, cows taste a lot different than chickens, who taste a lot different from pigs. Well, apples taste a lot different from corn, which tastes a lot different from wheat, even though they're all plants. And the same is true with fungi. Different fungi strains have different flavors, textures, protein contents, and more. And we at the Better Meat Co. use a very different organism than corn does, and we get a much more meat-like texture. And so that's a big difference between them and us, is that we are growing a different fungi protein than they do, one that frankly grows faster and is more meat-like in its texture. It also has a much longer history of human consumption for going back centuries than theirs, which has a history of human consumption going back decades. Theirs is perfectly safe to eat for nearly everybody, but it isn't the same as what we do. And I just want to point out to Maya, who's asking if it's a whole food, why is there a business making it? That's like, this is a fermentation process, right? You take fungi, you take spores, you subject them to a fermentation, and you grow them in the same way that somebody might take spores of mushrooms and grow them inside of a mushroom farm, right? There are businesses that make and sell mushrooms, even though mushrooms are a whole food. Similarly, we're taking spores of fungi and subjecting them to a fermentation where we do grow them. And we grow them into foods that look and taste like animal-based meat. So that's how you get a business that goes into making these. And there's lots of different ways to make them, just like there's lots of different ways to brew alcohol. You can make beer, wine, etc. And there's a multitude of sub fractions within those of what type of beer, what type of wine, even though they're all just brewer's yeast essentially, which is fungal in nature, by the way. Brewer's yeast is a fungus. But think about all the things that you can do with brewer's yeast to make thousands of different types of alcohol. Well, with a different type of fungi, in this case, mycelial proteins, you can make all different types of cool products out of them. And so there's lots of business opportunities therein.
What's the fermentation process?
So imagine a stainless steel fermenter. It looks like a craft brewery, right? You fill it up with water, and then in that water, you're essentially going to put sugar, which is how you make beer as well. Like, when you think about the reason why you have the barley in the beer is because the brewer's yeast consumes the sugar and it converts it into alcohol, right? So when you make beer, you've basically got a microorganism that's consuming sugar and turning it into alcohol. Similarly, let's say you're making bread, you use baker's yeast. That organism consumes the sugar in the wheat and it converts it into CO2, which is why it makes the bread rise. In fact, when you see bubbles inside of the bread, that's from the CO2 from the baker's yeast. That's why if you don't have baker's yeast, the bread won't rise and you're going to get matzah for Passover rather than a loaf of bread. Now, we are not using organisms that when they eat sugar make alcohol or make CO2. What we're doing is growing organisms that are highly proteinaceous. And so they eat sugar, and then by the end of the fermentation process, which is usually about 16 hours or so, there's really no sugar left. They've consumed it, and now it's basically a package of protein and fiber. And so that's how we can make this so rapidly, because we are using these microscopic organisms. It takes a long time for a cow to make another cow. It takes a really long time for a pig to make another pig. But when you're dealing at the microscopic level, that replication is really fast, just happening. And so that's how we get a fermentation that can last only hours rather than having to spend months or years growing animals. Nancy, I want to point out, you're asking if you can tour the facility. Yeah, if you're in Sacramento, just hit us up. We're again, bettermeat.co. We'd love to hear from you. We do factory tours regularly. And I really appreciate, Dominique, your supportive words here. He says, first time you're hearing encouraging news with regards to the planet's future and the global transition to end animal exploitation. I agree with you. I agree with you. The key is to scale this up. It doesn't take that much money, but it does take money. We got to do it.